America wasn't supposed to win. In 1776, it was just 13 weak colonies, outmatched, outgunned, and completely outnumbered by the most powerful empire on Earth. Britain controlled global trade, commanded the seas, and had a professional army that had defeated far stronger enemies. On paper, the outcome of a rebellion was obvious. So how did this small, fragile group of colonies become the most powerful country in human history? And more importantly, is that power now beginning to shift? To understand America's rise, you have to go back to a time when it barely even existed. Because this story isn't just about strength, it's about survival, timing, and a series of decisions that could have easily gone the other way. In the late 1700s, America wasn't a unified nation. It was a loose collection of colonies, each with its own identity, economy, and interests. They were dependent on Britain for protection and trade, and deeply divided among themselves. When tensions escalated over taxes and control, rebellions seemed almost irrational. Britain had the strongest navy in the world, a trained military, and global resources to draw from. America had farmers, militias, and limited supplies. But the colonies adapted. They avoided direct confrontation, used guerrilla-style tactics, and stretched British forces across vast distances. Even more crucially, they secured foreign support. France, eager to weaken Britain, provided money, troops, and naval power. That alliance changed everything. In 1783, against all expectations, America secured its independence. But victory didn't mean stability. In reality, it marked the beginning of a new and uncertain struggle. After the war, the United States was dangerously fragile. The government was weak, the economy unstable, and trust between states was limited. There was no guarantee this new country would survive. In fact, many believed it wouldn't. But instead of collapsing, its leaders made a critical choice. They built a system designed not just to govern, but to endure. The Constitution created a balance of power, preventing any one group from gaining too much control. It allowed flexibility, adaptation, and gradual change. This wasn't a perfect system, but it was resilient, and that resilience became one of America's greatest strengths. Still, internal tensions remained. The country was growing, but so were the divisions beneath the surface. During the 1800s, America expanded rapidly westward. Land represented opportunity, wealth, and independence. New territories brought resources and fueled economic growth. But expansion also came with conflict, especially with Native American populations who were displaced, and with neighboring nations like Mexico. At the same time, a deeper issue was dividing the country from within: slavery. As new states formed, the question of whether they would allow slavery created intense political and social tension. Eventually, that tension reached a breaking point. The Civil War began, a brutal conflict that nearly destroyed the nation. Over 600,000 lives were lost. Cities were devastated, families torn apart, and the country itself stood on the edge of collapse. But when the war ended, something fundamental had changed. The United States emerged not just reunited, but stronger, more centralized, and more determined to move forward. By the late 1800s, America entered a period of explosive growth. This was the age of industry. Railroads connected the entire continent, allowing goods, people, and ideas to move faster than ever before. Factories replaced farms, and cities expanded rapidly. Immigrants arrived in massive numbers, bringing labor, skills, and cultural diversity. America's natural resources, coal, oil, iron-fueled industries that would shape the modern world. Innovation became a driving force. New technologies transformed daily life and increased productivity on a massive scale. Companies grew into powerful corporations, and the economy expanded at an unprecedented rate. By the early 20th century, The United States was no longer just developing, it was becoming a major industrial power. But global dominance had not yet been secured. That would come through conflict on a much larger scale. When World War I began in 1914, the United States chose to remain neutral. It watched from a distance as Europe descended into chaos. But neutrality didn't last. Economic ties, political pressures, and attacks on American ships eventually pulled the country into the war. When it entered, it brought fresh troops, resources, and energy that helped turn the tide. The war ended in 1918, leaving Europe devastated. Empires had fallen, economies were shattered, and millions of lives had been lost. The United States, however, emerged relatively unscathed. Its infrastructure was intact, its economy stronger, and its global influence significantly increased. Still, it retreated somewhat from world affairs until the next global crisis forced it back into action. World War II changed everything. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States entered the war fully. This time, it didn't just participate, it became the central force. American factories produced weapons, vehicles, and supplies on a scale the world had never seen. Its military fought across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. The war demanded total mobilization, and the country responded with unmatched capacity. When the war ended in 1945, much of the world lay in ruins. Cities were destroyed, economies collapsed, and millions were displaced. But the United States stood strong. It had not only survived, it had grown more powerful than ever before. This moment marked the true beginning of its status as a global superpower. In the decades that followed, the United States entered a new phase, the superpower era. It had the strongest economy, the most advanced military, and influence that reached every part of the world. But it wasn't alone. The Soviet Union emerged as a rival, creating a divided global order. The Cold War began, not as a direct military conflict, but as a prolonged struggle for influence. It played out through political pressure, technological competition, and proxy wars across different regions. This was a battle of ideologies: capitalism versus communism, democracy versus authoritarian control. For decades, the tension shaped global politics. But in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and for the first time in modern history, the United States stood as the sole superpower. The years that followed represented the peak of American influence. Its economy dominated global markets, its culture spread across continents, and its military remained unmatched. Technology companies rose to global prominence, shaping communication, business, and daily life worldwide. But with power came new challenges. Military conflicts in the Middle East drained resources and created long-term instability. Economic crises, like the one in 2008, exposed vulnerabilities within the system. At the same time, new powers were rising. China's rapid economic growth began shifting the balance of global influence. Russia reasserted itself politically and militarily. The world was changing, and America's position, while still strong, was no longer unchallenged. Today, the global landscape is more complex than ever before. Power is distributed across multiple regions, and influence comes not just from military strength, but from technology, trade, and global connections. The United States remains one of the most powerful nations in the world, but it now operates in a system where competition is constant and leadership is shared. The question is no longer just how America became a superpower, but what kind of power it will be in the future. Because history shows a clear pattern. No nation stays at the top forever. Empires rise, expand, and eventually adapt or decline. America's story is still unfolding, but its next chapter may not be defined by dominance, but by how well it can evolve in a rapidly changing world.